Now let me find my fantasy playlist up to number 18, down from number 7. Culture Club, their first American hit, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? Fantasy playlist of March 18th, 1983. When I first heard this record, the first thing that hit my head, the stylistics. It sounded so much like the stylistics, as if Tom Bell, the producer of the stylistics, he produced hits by the Spinners, was at the production, the production console, the production board, weaving in the strings, just dressing up the vocals with strings, with just these. Well, it just sounded like a stylistics record. I don't need to wax poetic about it. That's what I thought. It was old school. But it did have a reggae influence, a Caribbean influence, though. And the reggae influence and the song came together. They had some spare time in the recording studio when they put this song together. It was for the Peter Powell show on BBC Radio 1. But it might have been BBC Radio 2, the more of the adult contemporary station, what we call adult contemporary here in the States. That they broke the record, or when they played the record, the song went to number 1 in England. Number 1 for 3 weeks in Britain, fall of 1982. It almost went to number 1 here in the States, but it was kept out of the number 1 position here in the States by Billie Jean, Michael Jackson, which is coming up later on in my fantasy playlist. Sold about 2 million copies. It was just all over the world. This record went to number 1 in Switzerland, Australia, Austria, Belgium, Sweden, to name a few. The UK, of course. Church of the Poison Mind was one of their best records. Church of the Poison Mind in the fall of '83 had that Motown sound to it, that boom, 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 and you had the harmonica going. It was a brilliant dance record. Church of the Poison Mind. You'd think the Funk Brothers, of Motown's in-house band, was playing on that record. Gosh, dog. If you're watching this video in England, I gotta give it to you. I gotta give it to the British. A lot of you understand American soul. You bring it back to us here in America. Gosh dog it, I just marvel at the Europeans. But I said it a million times. Let's get back to this record. This was a personal record for Boy George. Now, here's the thing about this tune. Boy George, they had released a couple of records that bombed. This record was actually their 3rd single release in Europe, their first American release and Canadian release. And Boy George told the record company, do not put that record out. Do not put out Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? It's not us. It's not a club record. It won't hold a candle to a Spandau Ballet record. It's nothing. It wouldn't stand up against Spandau Ballet. Would look foolish against them. Against the so-called New Romantics. Whatever. But the record company put it out, and Boy George has no regrets. Very personal record for him. It's about his boyfriend, John Moss, the drummer. They'd been going out for about 6 years. Probably also about some of the other guys he was going out with at the time. And the look, the androgynous look of Boy George, that's for real. There's no kidding about that. That's not just for image or for selling records. He had been dressed up in women's clothes since he was in school. Great, well, when he was real young. Had that androgynous look. You know, it's interesting, people talk about transgenders now in 2017, but Boy George was already there, more or less, in 1983, and David Bowie was even there before that in the early 70s during his Ziggy Stardust persona. I do remember, I got to share a memory with you. I remember, I guess about the spring of 1983, a lot of people were just, his look, Boy George's androgynous look raised a lot of eyebrows, particularly here in the South. I mean, we're talking Alabama. And this was at the campus of the University of Alabama. I was walking up the stairs at Ferguson Center. I remember it. Ferguson Center. Up to 2nd floor of Ferguson Center. A couple of women, a couple of middle-aged women. Well, women at about 40-ish, 35, 40, something like that. Slightly overweight, if I remember correctly. I remember overhearing them. They were talking to each other. A couple of women coming down the stairs. they're making some biting comments about Boy George, making some negative remarks about Boy George, and well, he's dressed like a woman. He's like, whatever. They're making some negative remarks about his image. Of course, that was tame compared to what a lot of other people were saying at the time. Well, anyway, they came up with some fabulous records. Move Away, was it Move Away that I think it was their last hit back in the summer of '86. Or it might have been Boy George going solo. He did The Crying Game in 1983. That was a remake. He did a fantastic remake of that record. But the song Time, back in the spring of '83, another fantastic. They combine R&B, a little bit of Eurodance, that smooth soul. Soulful record. Culture Club, number 18 on my fantasy playlist of March 18th, 1983. Just looking over my notes here, see if there's anything I need to add. Did I mention that the song sold about, pretty phenomenal, about 2 million copies, close to 2 million copies? Boy George and the Culture Club on my fantasy playlist, March 18th, 1983.